Good afternoon. Let's take a look. We're busy with the exam preparation, and this afternoon we're going to focus a little bit on the question 3s and 4s that we're going to take a look at. Remember, that is settlement geography. We've done the physical part, question 1 and 2, where I've shown you how the November 2010 paper looks like. We're going to still stay with the November 2010 paper, but this time, this afternoon, we're going to focus on question 3 there. Which will be your urban and your rural settlements. Before we start with that, I just quickly want to show you something that inspired me.
Nothing's enjoyable if it's something that's easy to achieve. At the end of the day, that just makes victory sweeter. I enjoy challenging the way people think. When they see someone with a disability, they always focus on the disability. You know, that perception is something that I want to kind of alter. It's not about how big the hill is, but how you get around it or under it or over it. There's a big difference between being good and being great. When I woke up in the morning, Dad said to my brother, you know, you put on your shoes, I said, you put on your legs, that's the last we want to hear about it.
See, so this afternoon I would like to say to you, let's take Oscar Pistorius as an example and say that it doesn't matter how big the challenges are that you're facing, that we can overcome that. And what I want to challenge you this afternoon is to stay focused on what you want to achieve in life and go for it. So it all starts with the right attitude. And perhaps you must change your attitude. Perhaps you've got the right attitude. Perhaps you can help somebody else to get the right attitude. But let's make a difference in this world, and let's go and live out our dreams. So, when we take a look at the question papers, I want to show you again that we're going to focus on the annexure. And the annexure, remember, will be my sketches, my graphs, my paragraphs, things like that, case studies even, that I will have in front of me, that you'll get at the end of the year, and even in the mid-year exam and the September exam. And then the second thing that you'll get is your question paper. So in this case, you'll see section B deals with people and places, rural and urban settlements, and then people and their needs. And then we're going to answer at least one of these questions. So if you, for example, did question 1 and you do question 3, then you've got to do a third question, either then question 4 or you've got to do question 2. Just keep that in mind. So this afternoon, let's take a look. Question 3 says, refer to figure 3.1 illustrating settlement patterns. So we know what the question is about. It's about the patterns of settlements. And then they say indicate whether the following statements are true or false, and then choose the answer and write down only true or false next to the question number. So for example, you're going to write down 3.1.1 and you've got to say whether that is true or false. So it says figure 3.1 illustrates urban settlements. Now we won't know how to approach this question if we don't go to the annexure. So let's quickly take a look at the annexure. And in this one, you'll see there's A, B, C, and D at the bottom. Take a look at this because here at the bottom, they've given you the keys. For example, my lines would indicate my main roads. My lines that run parallel would indicate my main roads. My dotted lines or my dashed lines show the dirt roads. Then the square that you've got there, or the rectangle, as you can see, is my fields. Remember, they are English and Afrikaans, so yeah, but you just focus on the English, obviously. And then my block would be my farmhouse that I find. They also give you the scale of the settlements, 0 to 25 meters. For what's that worth? It doesn't really make a difference, but it will give you more or less the indication of how far they are separated from one another. So we take a look at A here. It shows that this section here are the fields. And in each one of those fields, there you'll see is my block that indicates my farmhouse that I find. So, if we take a look at A, it says that it shows the farmhouse and the fields, and it shows that the houses are grouped together. So they are grouped together. Just take a look, just separated from one another by the main road. They grouped. And you'll also see that that pattern then would be my nucleated pattern. If you can recall, there's isolated and there's nucleated. Isolated is when they stand on their own, and nucleated are when they group together. So this one indicates clearly that it's a nucleated. Let's take a look at B. B then says that there's my farmhouse where the arrow is pointing, and it says that it is isolated or on its own. You can see the difference between A and B just by looking at the sketch. Then if we go to number C, you'll see it looks like a line. There's all these houses are basically along the same line. So they look as if they're in line with one another, and they look as if they were placed in that way very specifically. Number D then shows you again the houses that are separate from one another. There you can see they are quite far from one another, so they are also dispersed. Dispersed means they are far away from one another. Let's now take a look and see if we can answer the questions. Because question number 1 says, figure 3.1 illustrates urban settlements. Now, this whole thing there, the question is this urban settlement? And let's take a look at what we've got here. We say urban is multifunctional, and we say rural is unifunctional. Okay? So is that one correct or is it incorrect? That one refers to rural areas. Okay? So that one would then be false. If we take a look at C, the question is, did it develop in a linear shape? Let's take a look at number C. There you can see they develop in a line, so it looks from this one as if that one is correct. Yes, it is true because it is shaped like a line. The next one asks B represents an isolated farmstead. Let's take a look if that is the truth. There you can see B, we said, is an isolated because it stands on its own. So in this case, the answer to that is yes, it is isolated because it is situated alone, so that one is true. The next one asks A shows a dispersed or isolated pattern. Is that true or false? Let's take a look. It says that houses are grouped together, so that means it is nucleated. So that one would be false in that case. 3.1.5 says D shows a randomly or dispersed pattern. If we take a look at number D, you'll see how it is spaced randomly apart from one another. So that one seems to be correct. That one, yes, it's true because the houses show no particular grouping. I hope you understand how to approach this question and how to make use of the sketches. When we then take a look at the following, 3.2 says, choose a statement from column B. So we must choose from column B that matches the term for column A. So we're going to write down, you'll see in column 1 it says 3.2.1, and then it goes down to 3.2.5. So in your question book, or in your answer book, you'll write 3.2.1, 3.2.2, 3.2.3, 3.2.4, and it goes down, and then we're going to pick from the list on the right-hand side in column B what fits the one on the left-hand side. Now, if we take a look at this, it is important to just more or less see the following. The first one that I want to show you is, if I can just get this to quickly open up the dialog box. There, it was there. It wasn't. Just give me a second. Let's start with number C. Number C is the provision of services. So that shows a tertiary activity. So when we take a look at that, we know that number 3.2.2 fits with C. So next to 3.2.2 you write the word C then, the letter C. When we take a look at D, it says the value of all goods and services or products produced in a country. And when we take a look at that, the answer to that is quite clear that is the gross domestic product. So I will then look for 3.2.1, that you'll see gross domestic product, and then I will write next to that number D. I hope you understand that one. There we go. If we can go back to B now, because there it pops up now. The company which has outlets or shops in different countries. When you hear the word different countries, you can know that it is national, because it's different countries, and different would be multinational. Multinational corporations would then fit number B. So here I'm looking for multinational corporations, and then B will fit next to that. Number E says it is the gross domestic product. It's all the finished products and services that you find in a country in a year. Number F relates to the informal sector, and here you can see the informal sector. Now the informal sector says that it is a trade following businesses that are not registered. That means they don't have things like VAT numbers, for example, or they're not registered for specific as a specific business. They open these shops basically randomly, and they sell their products from the street. So it is trade involving these businesses that occupy, and they mention it there, occupy premises illegally. This is not always the case. Sometimes they're also legal, but that is then my informal sector. And in the last one, G, says that it is the difference in value between the country's imports and exports. And when I take a look at that, it tells you that it is the balance of trade. Remember, balance is how these things balance one another. And when we talk about balance, it is the difference between the imports and the exports. So by taking a look at that, it is easy to then fit these together. 3.3.3.1 deals with urban expansion. So what we do here is, you'll see if we read the question 3.3, it says rapid urban expansion has had a major impact on large cities. So we're talking about the impact of expansion on cities in South Africa. And then they say that we must refer to figure 3.3. So let's first take a look at figure 3.3, because that will help us a little bit. There you can see figure 3.3, and there's a couple of things in that that's quite significant. Number one is, we can see the city, and you can see with the city there's lots of pollution, etc., etc. Then you see how people are actually moving here on the road into the city. So people are on their way to the city. The next thing that you see is a big billboard that says Megalopolis. And then it also says 50 kilometers, 50 kilometers, 30 kilometers, I can't see through that line that's drawn there, and then 10 kilometers. What that illustrates is that this Megalopolis, this big city, because Megalopolis is the biggest city, was at some stage 50 kilometers from this little house that we find here. But then it moved closer, it's now 30 kilometers. And it's not because the house moved, it is because the city is expanding towards the house. And now it is only 10 kilometers. So you find that the city is actually expanding all the way into rural communities. And here you can see that it looks like health workers that are standing there, that are talking to one another. I'm not 100% sure whether it is, but we can take a look at that later. They are saying, we are waiting for the city to come to us. So they're not going to the city, they're waiting for the city. But here's a couple of other people that are not waiting, they're on their way to the city. So looking at this, let's see if we can then answer the questions. The first question says, define the term urban expansion. And when we talk about urban, we're talking about the cities, remember. So when we say expansion, it is literally the physical growth of the city. And we said that these cities are growing as they move, and they're moving closer and closer and closer to more rural areas as they take up more space. But here you can see, urban expansion is the physical growth of the city. The next question asks, what message is the cartoonist trying to convey or to get across to us about the expansion of cities? So what is he trying to say with his cartoon? And I think just by looking at this, he is saying that the city is growing rapidly. That means it's growing quickly. It shows the speed of the city growing. Remember, we had on the board 50 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 10 kilometers, trying to illustrate that this city is growing so quickly that they can't even keep up with that. On the billboard, they had to change this on a continuous basis. So the city is growing rapidly. The other question, 3.3.3, is what do you understand by the term megalopolis? And I've already mentioned that, but it is the largest of the settlements when conurbations join. Conurbation is like a grouping of a city and a town together that actually form one, and then when we've got these conurbations that grow together, we find that we call that a megalopolis. So it's the largest of all the settlements when conurbations join. The next question says, give the geographical term used to describe the uncontrolled expansion of a residential area on the outskirts of an urban area. It might sound difficult. Let's take a look what they specifically want. They're looking for a term that just explains the following. The uncontrolled expansion, so that means it's out of control, expansion of residential areas on the outskirts of urban areas. And when we think about that, the term for that is urban sprawl. Urban sprawl is this uncontrolled, literally, expansion of the city that takes place in a short period of time. 3.3.5 says, state 2 challenges the city councils experience with regard to expansion of cities. So here we're focusing on the challenges or the problems that city councils or town councils experience with regard to the expansion of cities. And when we talk about that, it means that all of a sudden the city is growing, so that means the physical city is growing, but also the population numbers that are growing. That creates challenges for most municipalities or most local councils. And when we talk about that, the first challenge that they sit with is overcrowding. The second challenge that they sit with is the lack of basic services that they can't deliver, because as soon as they've provided basic services to one person, there's another person in from the rural communities as well, because of this rapid increase. And then the third thing that they struggle with is where there's a concentration of people, you often find that crime levels increase. And because of the crime levels that increase, it also creates challenges for local communities. The last thing that we're looking at is pollution. Again, where there's a concentration of people and there's more cars in a city, there's more industries in a city, we're bound to find that pollution becomes a big problem. Also, we're not just talking about pollution from the atmosphere's point of view, but we're also talking about land pollution and water pollution that will also increase in this regard. I think you see that these things are very logical, and when you think clearly about that, it's easy to find the answers to these questions. But you must have the basics sorted out. Please study the work. Don't just think, you know what, I can answer these questions without studying. It doesn't work that way. Then you'll see 3.3.6 says suggest 2 environmentally friendly measures to prevent uncontrolled urban expansion. So what can they do that's environmentally friendly that can prevent uncontrolled urban expansions? The first thing is that you can create green belts. So green belts are areas that are zoned for a specific purpose that no development takes place there. So it will stop people from settling in those areas. The other thing that you can do is you can develop new towns. If I develop a new town, it means that everybody's not drawn to a specific area. They can stay there, and then people can move in and out and commute on a day-to-day basis. The other thing that one can do is to look at rural development so that you can have an injection in rural communities so that people don't feel the need the whole time to move to cities, that they can actually settle in the rural areas. And then the last thing is linked to this, it is decentralization, where it means that for some or other reason I can then try and attract businesses to rural areas or factories or industries to rural areas to say, but you know what, come open your industrial business here in my rural community, and what we will do is to make it worthwhile, we can give you certain tax incentives or whatever the case might be. That it just stimulates the economy when people move to the rural areas, and then people will have jobs there, and it will stop people from moving the whole time to the urban areas. Then 3.4 asks whether you can answer the following questions. Refer to figure 3.4 showing the cycle of rural decay. So this focus on rural decay, which also occurs in the South African landscape. This often results in rural-urban migration. So it is the movement, migration is the movement, the rural-urban from the rural areas to the urban areas, resulting in specific problems in rural areas. So now they ask, define the term rural-urban migration. We've already said that in our introduction now, but let's quickly first, before we answer that question, take a look at the sketch that refers to this. There you can see here, there's your sketch on 3.4, and in this sketch, it literally shows a couple of things. And let's take a look. Let's start at 12 o'clock, if you can join me to go through this. At 12 o'clock it says, young active people leave rural areas to make a better life in the cities. So that's where it starts. Now you can see that this is basically a cycle that will continue. So if the young people leave, the next step would be older people cannot work as hard. If older people cannot work as hard, it means that they will become less productive. That is around about at the bottom of the sketch. Then if we move past 6 o'clock at the bottom, round about to 7 o'clock, you'll see the income per capita in rural areas is reduced. So we've got people leaving the area, we've got older people remaining, then we've got less productive population, and then we've got that the capital is reduced in these rural areas. And because of the fact that there's less capital in the rural areas, that means there's less money. It means that people are starving. You'll see that at 11 o'clock. And because people are starving, they are leaving the rural areas and they're going to cities, which is again back to 12 o'clock, and this cycle will continue and continue and continue, and it will result in a decay of rural areas because of rural-urban migration. So let's take a look at this quickly. It says define the term rural-urban migration. When we talk about that, it is the movement of people from rural areas to urban areas on a continuous basis. So that is rural-urban migration. The question is now, name 2 push factors that may result in rural-urban migration. Now, I think just before you answer this, a lot of people miss that word, the 2 push factors. If we say that it is a pull factor, it will draw people. But if it's a push factor, it will push people away from an area. So in this case, we're not talking about those conditions that pull people towards a city. We're saying that you must discuss the push factors that result in rural-urban migration. That means, what are the things that push people away from my rural areas? Those are the things that we're interested in. And if we take a look at that, it is the lack of jobs. Often in the exams, people write jobs. Jobs can also be a pull factor, because if I create jobs, it's a pull factor. But in this case, why is the push factor? Because it's the lack of jobs. It is low salaries that push people away. People often get paid less in the rural communities than they would in cities. And then the last thing that can be regarded as a push factor is the lack of proper education. So because there's not good quality education in my rural areas often, that I find people tend to say, you know what, I want my child to have a proper education, so I am going to go to the city areas or the urban areas. And lack of proper education can be a push factor in this case. 3.4.3 asks the following question. It says, discuss 3 consequences or results of rural-urban migrations for the South African rural community. So the fact that people move away from the rural area will result in something in my rural community. And what are those consequences for my rural community? Now if we take a look at this, and that is why I asked you to go through the annexure nicely in the exam as well. Because in the annexure, they already give you the answer to this. Let's take a look. The negative consequences for rural areas is, number one, it leaves old people in my rural area. So that means the population is aging. The second thing is that the population become less productive, which is already stipulated in the annexure as well. The third thing is there's less capital in my rural areas. That means if there's less capital, even businesses, shops close down. And then the last thing that happens is people are starving. So if we take a look at our answer to this, the consequences of rural urban migration for the South African rural economy, it says there that population ages, the decrease in production on farms, services or shops that close down, and farmlands that end up not being used productively. I think you can see that sometimes the answers are given to you there. But you must make sure that you stay focused, that you go through the annexure, that you read the question properly, and that you can then just apply your knowledge. 3.4.4 asks to write a single paragraph in which you discuss sustainable strategies that can be used to manage South Africa's declining rural settlement. It looks complicated. It's not a complicated question. Let me give you this. Number one, it says it must be a sustainable thing. So it means that it must have its own energy. It must be able to continue going. It must be sustainable in the long run. And what must be sustainable? Things that can be used to manage South Africa's declining rural settlements. Okay. So if we take a look at that, then we can say that sustainable activities in rural areas that one can implement might be things like tourism. If I stimulate tourism in my rural areas, it will mean that I can just move this up slightly. There. Now you'll be able to see. There's the question. If we move that up slightly, you can see that the question is whether you can answer this paragraph to say in which you discuss the sustainable strategies that can be used to manage South Africa's declining population. So we actually want to turn this around now by using sustainable measures in order to stop people from leaving rural areas. What can we do to do that? We can stimulate the economy there by creating tourism in my rural areas. Remember, people would like to perhaps see rural areas, because on that I might find agricultural activities, I might find game farms, those kind of things. So creating tourism potential in my rural areas might perhaps stop this process from people migrating. The other thing that I can do is to increase basic services. That means make it better for people to stay in rural areas so that they don't feel they need to go to an urban area to go and live there. If they've got running water, they've got sanitation, they've got electricity, they've got proper housing, they've got education, they're fine. The next thing is to have industrial decentralization. And that means to stimulate the economy in such a way that industries open up industrial developments in my rural areas so that jobs can be created. The next thing to do is to implement GEAR or RDP, which are products of the government that wants to make sure that basic needs are met of the population and that economic development takes place with a GEAR. The next thing that people can do is to train upcoming farmers. Often farmland are being handed to local communities, and what can happen in that case is if we train the farmer to farm productively, it can stimulate the economy, jobs can be created, and people will stay in the rural areas. And then the last thing that people can do there is to just to improve the infrastructure. That means to increase your road maintenance, to do things like electricity, water, etc., etc., that people don't feel that they've got to go to urban areas to have a proper infrastructure. All of these are sustainable things in the long run that can manage the declining of rural communities so that they actually feel, you know what, it's worthwhile for me to stay in the rural areas. Then the next question says the following. It refers to figure 3.5 showing South Africa's largest industrial regions. Now let's quickly take a look at that and see if you can answer this question. Now, in term 2, you would not have done the economic activities yet. But when you write the final exam or you write the September exam, you would have done your industrial activities and the industrial areas. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to discuss it this afternoon so that you get an idea about this. And this question refers to this figure that you see in front of you. Now, you'll see there's the word Limpopo, there's the word Northwest, here's Mpumalanga, and here's the Free State. So we're talking about this area of the map that literally borders Limpopo, Northwest, Mpumalanga, and the Free State. And this area that you see there is Gauteng. And how do I know it's Gauteng? You can see there's the word Pretoria that I found just above the key, and when I see the word Pretoria, I know it is in the Gauteng province that we're talking about. So the questions will be related to the Gauteng province. Okay. If we then go back, it says it identifies the industrial region showing figure 3.5. And when we identify that, take a look, it is the Gauteng. We already mentioned it is Pretoria, and Pretoria is situated in Gauteng. Pretoria is also neighboring all these other provinces. Question 3.5.2 says, name any one of the dominant industrial activities found in the industrial region mentioned in 3.5.1. So we're looking at a very important industrial activity that we find in this region. And if you've been to Gauteng, you would know that one of the most important things that we find there is the chemical industry that we find in Sasolburg, for example. So Sasol, which is in the petroleum industry, would be regarded as one of those dominant industrial activities. It might also be other things like, for example, your engineering would also be a dominant industrial activity in Gauteng. Question 3.5.3 says, discuss any 3 factors that favor industrial development in the industrial region. So what are the things that favor industrial development in the Gauteng? Let's take a look at that. Number 1, you find lots of minerals in Gauteng. You find things like coal in the close proximity. You find things like gold in close proximity. You find things like iron ore that they use for the iron and steel industry in close proximity. All those minerals has played a part in the development of the industrial region to make Gauteng the industrial giant, not just of South Africa, but of Africa. The other thing that also played a part is the big population. Because if you've got a big population, it's got a big market. Remember, then there's lots of people that will be able to buy your products. And then the last thing is the large labor force that we've got in Gauteng as well. If I've got a large labor force, it means there's lots of people that can actually work in this activity. And because of the fact that there's lots of laborers, it makes it easy for factories to settle in this area. The last thing on 3.5.4 is discuss 3 problems associated with industrial development in the industrial region. And if we take a look at the problems, it is water shortages. They are running out of water. That's why water needed to be supplemented, not just from South Africa, but also from the Lesotho Highland scheme in order to get water into the Vaal Dam so that we can increase the water for the Gauteng region. The second problem that they experience is the high levels of pollution that we find in the area. And then the last thing is the congestion or the overcrowding that we find in this area that makes it very difficult because people spend lots of time on the road, it's difficult to transport finished products, etc., etc. I hope that you understand how to approach a question like that. Let's take a look at question 3.6, and you'll see that this is the last one of this section before we get to question 4, but we're just going to do 3.6 this afternoon, so that is the last one that we're going to do. It says read the extract in figure 3.6 before answering the following questions. Now I think what is important there is just to go back to this annexure, and then we see figure 3.6. There's 2 pictures there of 2 dams, and then it says the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. So we know what it's about. It's about the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. Then let's read this quickly. It says the Lesotho Highlands Water Project is Africa's largest water transfer project, as well as the largest ongoing bi-national construction project on the continent. If you hear the word bi-national, it means bi is two, like bicycle with two wheels. Bi-national construction is two, and national is countries, so it is two countries working together. It is an ongoing water supply project with a hydropower component. Hydro means water and power is electricity, so it is water, electricity, so it's hydroelectricity that they're talking about. Developed in partnership between the governments of Lesotho and South Africa. It comprises a system of several large dams and tunnels throughout Lesotho and South Africa. It involves the rivers Malibamaso, Matsoko, Sengunyane and Senkwa. I do apologize for my pronunciation. My Sesotho is not what it's supposed to be. So only thing I can say there is Ntswarele. In South Africa it involves the Vaal River. The purpose of the project is to provide Lesotho with a source of income in exchange for the provision of water to the central Gauteng. So what they say here is they already identify the purpose. The purpose is, number one, it provides Lesotho with a source of income, and the other thing is, in exchange for that, it provides water to South Africa, where the majority of the industrial and mining activities occurs in South Africa, which is the Gauteng province, as well as to generate hydroelectrical power for Lesotho, currently almost 100% of Lesotho's requirement. Again, there's a spin-off for Lesotho. The one that I mentioned here is the income for Lesotho. The other thing is that it creates hydroelectricity for Lesotho. The spin-off for South Africa is that it creates water for South Africa. I apologize again for the pronunciation of those rivers in Lesotho that I didn't get quite spot on. I hope you'll understand. Now the question is, what is a bi-national construction project? And when we get to that, bi equals 2, as I've explained, construction project is between two countries. So it is the construction project between two countries. It's as simple as that. Define the term water transfer scheme. Water transfer means to carry over or to make available or to give. And what you'll see there is that it is water transfer from the surplus area to an area in need. In the past, in the exam, a lot of people just said that it is a water transfer between two areas. If you don't mention from an area of surplus to an area in need, you're not going to get the marks for this. So water transfer scheme means it is the water transfer from an area of surplus to an area in need. Now the area of surplus in this case is Lesotho, where they've got a surplus water, they've got more than they need, and the area in need would be the Gauteng province, where we haven't got enough water. Question 3.6.3 says, with reference to the water resources of South Africa, give 2 reasons why the country initiated or started the development of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. So why did we go to Lesotho and say, you know what, can't we start this project? The answer to that is that we had to solve the water shortages in South Africa. That was the major thing. The second thing was to add water to the Vaal Dam, or to supplement or supply water to Gauteng. And then the third thing is, in South Africa our rainfall is very erratic and sometimes even low. Erratic means that we can't rely on that on a continuous basis. This year we might have a high rainfall and next year might be the low. If you can recall, 2011 was a high rainfall period and 2012 in comparison was a low rainfall period. When we get to 3.6.4, apologies, with reference to the quality of life of the people of Lesotho, evaluate 2 possible injustices or 2 problems associated with the development of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. So what are the things that counted against the people who actually lived in Lesotho when this project was established. And the one thing was that farmland was lost. You can imagine if you build a dam in an area, it means that there where I find the dam now, at some stage people use that for farming purposes. But they can't do that anymore. So it's loss of farming land. The other thing that happened there was the ecosystems that we found in that area were destroyed because of the fact that we created a new ecosystem with the dams. Let me give you an example. You might have a rabbit there, and then you might have predators that preyed on the rabbit as an ecosystem. Now all of a sudden the rabbit doesn't like water, so the rabbit's not there anymore, so the predator can't prey on that anymore as well. But what we've done is we created a total new ecosystem with a dam where you find frogs, and you might find things like crabs, or you might find things like fish that you find in that. So there's a total new ecosystem that has been established. And then the last thing that also created a problem for the people of Lesotho was people needed to be moved from one area to another. So people had to be relocated, which is a problem, especially if people have been living there for many years. I mean, there's some of those land that might have been in the possession of people for generations, and all of a sudden they needed to be relocated. So that's another problem. And then the last one says, despite the above mentioned injustices. So you can't mention that. It's despite that, those injustices. Both Lesotho and South Africa gained from the development of the Lesotho Highlands water scheme. Write a single paragraph to discuss the advantages of the Lesotho Highlands water project for both Lesotho and South Africa. And again, here a lot of people just start off on the right and they just mention what the benefits are for South Africa. But you must mention benefits to Lesotho as well as South Africa. And some of those benefits to Lesotho would be the following. Let's start with South Africa. South Africa would gain by having water for industries. The other thing that happens for South Africa is you've got household water. You also have water for mining in South Africa. But in terms of Lesotho, it's a different story. Lesotho gains by getting hydroelectrical energy from that. Also, it creates an income for Lesotho. Remember, we pay Lesotho for the water that we get. The big word for that is we pay them royalties. So we pay to use their water. The other thing that Lesotho benefits is jobs were created. Remember, people needed to build the dams. People needed to build the roads. People needed to build various other things as well. And when they do that, it means that jobs were created. The last thing is that infrastructure has been developed in the area. Just think, in order to get people to the area where they actually constructed the dam, people needed to be transported there. So things like roads were developed. Things like electricity, because I needed to get the hydroelectricity from the dam to the area like in Masiro, as an example. If I do that, I must create infrastructure, I must have power lines, those kind of things that previously perhaps didn't exist. So from that point of view, Lesotho benefited, and maybe Lesotho benefited and still continues benefiting even on a day-to-day basis, and perhaps even more than South Africa benefits, although we cannot survive without the water that we get from the Lesotho Highlands scheme. Especially Gauteng would be a problem because the Vaal Dam, quite frankly, can't supply enough water for the Gauteng province. I hope you understand how to answer these questions. Please make sure that when you approach these paragraph questions, you must address what they say. People often write and they don't even address the question. Please make sure that you know what the question is about. I hope that you will be successful in your preparation for the exam. I hope that you won't leave it till the last, because remember, I cannot go and take part in the Olympics by preparing a day or two in advance. It is literally months and sometimes even years that I need to prepare. You also need to prepare well. Prepare from day one and make sure that you break down the work into small manageable parts that you can study, so that you are successful when you go and write the exam. And when you walk into the exam, Be confident that you can answer the questions, and if there's certain questions that are difficult, don't panic. Just relax. If you know your work, your brain will start processing that, and you can skip that question, go back later, and you'll be able to address it. I hope that you have lots of fun in preparing, and I hope that the exams will be a good experience for you and that you'll get good results.